Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I am Calpurnia Roberts, the Director of A Place to Live, the newest initiative from MHSA to increase the inventory of permanent supportive housing in the Commonwealth by using innovative housing solutions such as modular construction to house medically complex adults experiencing recurrent or long-term homelessness. Today, we will hear from key decision makers and experts who inspired A Place to Live. These experts include Marc Margulies, Alex Corrales, and Jim Cuddy, and they'll be joined by the President and Executive Director of MHSA, Joe Finn. Marc Margulies is an architect.
It appears as though we
lost Calpurnia.
Lost Calpurnia in the middle of our. Should we continue until we get Calpurnia back on the scene? But
maybe we'll have Marc give his own bio.
Yeah,
that's, right. That's fine.
I know the bio got interrupted.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's quite all right. Joe, why don't you go?
Yeah, I'm going to basically let me start to tell you, and I'll certainly could give you. I'm going so far back it'll hit Marc's bio in many respects, but when I first started at MHSA, when we were doing housing first, we really weren't talking necessarily about the housing. We were really talking about a delivery of service system. We were talking about low threshold housing, low barrier housing, a different model of providing services that proved to be more successful in creating long-term tenancies amongst persons who had medically complex issues, behavioral health issues, whatever, that this was a particular way of approaching it. But as time went on, as we advanced, into around, again, 2015, almost to the present, that one of the things I kept hearing from all of our providers was inventory. We don't have sufficient inventory to be able to actually place people. We all heard stories of people with vouchers going around. They couldn't find a place to live anywhere. And I started to think back. I remembered a conversation when I ran Shelter Inc., an organization that now people know as Heading Home. I don't know why they felt the need to change the name after I left, but when I was there, we were spending about, I think it was close to about 1.5 million to convert a convent in North Cambridge that again, we had about housed long-term in rooms without without bathrooms. They all had common bathrooms, common kitchens, and for about 12 people. And one of my directors was Marc Margulies, who was at that point in time, I think it was before it even became Margulies and Perruzzi, a firm doing massive amounts in the commercial markets and the like in Boston. But he had always been dedicated to this issue. But one of the things he said to me that stuck in my mind was simply this: every time we do something for the homeless, we're trying to retrofit. We're really just trying to fix existing structures in a way, and they're just so costly. He said, wouldn't it be great if we really thought in different terms and thought about designing something that fit the needs of the population that we're trying to serve? So of course, today, when I keep thinking that we need to get to 1,500 to 2,000 units just alone across the Commonwealth to even get close to the concept of what they refer to as functional zero. But I called Marc, and it's taken a while. We've worked, I think, 5 years. But the minute I called Marc, I triggered something that was just absolutely amazing. He was back to me in a matter of weeks already with conceptual drawings and taking a look at what we might be able to do, because we all know how costly housing is. And so with that, I'd like to introduce a friend and long-term director, Marc Margulies.
Thank you, Joe. It looks like Calpurnia, you're back on, which is great. Don't know what happened there.
Yes.
But Joe is just kept us going, and I'll proceed, if I may, with sharing my screen. I'd like to talk a little bit about what came from that conversation. Joe and I and the folks from Heading Home have designed and are now have in place 5 homeless shelters. And I was always shocked at how expensive they are. And so when Joe first talked about this, we gathered a group of caseworkers and folks who were involved in service delivery. And the question was, if you could build the right thing for a chronically homeless population, what would that be? And the answer is that it would be a unit that was had its own lock and key. It had its own bathroom. It had a little place, a kitchenette, and people could live there long-term or short-term, comfortably, in a very respectable environment. It doesn't have to be very large. And so by the time you work this out and try to make sure it has all the components to it, we end up with this basically 225 square foot unit that somebody could live in for a long time or not. But it would work for them regardless really of what their physical or mental situation might be. And so if that is the module that you're going to begin with as a starting point, the question is, and there's a 3D, you can see it's not large, but has everything that someone could find to be a comfortable place to live. You then say, what is the most efficient way to aggregate those into a building that is cost effective? And the answer is you build it, you design it so that it is no more than 3,000 square feet per floor and no more than 3 stories high, because if you do it that way and put all the accessible units on the first floor, you then have built a building that is as large as it can be without needing an elevator. It needs 2 sets of stairs, and it needs to meet all the codes, and all of the units on the first floor need to meet all of the federal and state guidelines for accessibility. And we've been working with DHCD as I know Alex has on his, to make sure that they're comfortable with all of the requirements. This particular building that we came up with has a resident manager living there. It has common laundry and utilities and a counseling room. And then on the floors above, again, just the most efficient way of creating up to 24 units. We design buildings that really work between 18 and 24. And the reason that we've settled on that size is twofold. Number one, we're thinking ahead about this idea of modular construction, which I'm going to start talking about in a second. And secondly, the idea is that these are intended to be buildings that fit into whatever community they end up going into. It's not, the idea isn't to create a huge development. This is basically, call it a triple decker, and we've designed them in a bunch of different ways. But it's, it's wherever you have, 3 or 4 family houses, this would fit right in. So you can see the double lines that are running across the middle of that. That's, as we think about doing this the most cost-effective way, we're thinking about having these units built in a factory. So here they are stacked. You can see that they're repetitive. The building could look like this. We've designed them to fit in a Cambridge environment where it's a flat roof and it looks just like all the other buildings. So where's the efficiency in this? First of all, the efficiency is that the building has no wasted space. The second part is that from the foundation up, everything is built in a factory. Why build it in a factory? Because it's better and less expensive. So here, this happens to be a factory in New Hampshire. We've worked with them a bunch on the design of it. There is no waste. Everything, even the sawdust is recycled for heating the building. Nothing gets thrown out. The boxes are built actually in a different way than you can build them on site. You can see that the foam around the edges of the 2x6s is a far, far more energy efficient building than you can create if you build it on site. It then gets wrapped. And up top, you can see these are the roof trusses that are going to be shipped and then tipped up and erected on site. They come to the site, you have to unload them. They are then stacked on top of each other. Once you have the foundation in place, these units get installed and buttoned up in 2 weeks. So the whole process, the time period is completely different, abbreviated, once you get your approvals, of course, and Alex is going to talk about that because that's a separate conversation, right? But the construction of this is extremely efficient. This happens to be one that that I photographed in 2016, going up on Mass Ave in Cambridge. So they can occur any place. And here's an image of what we proposed as part of that early conversation with Joe. And the idea is it fits in any place, right? You can decorate it a little bit more, a little bit less. It just looks like more or less like the rest of the buildings. So why is this a good idea? First of all, you can be building the modules in the factory while the foundations are being installed. So instead of it being sequential and therefore taking a year to build the whole thing, it takes 6 months to build the whole thing, maybe even less, but we're being conservative about that. And because it's so cost effective to build these units in a factory, and there's so little site work involved, it's basically just a foundation and sidewalks and maybe some parking. We can build these, and I'm saying 120,000 a unit. It is possible to do them for less. It is possible to do them for more, depending upon the procurement process and whether it's union or non-union. There are a lot of factors, but I defy anybody in other situation to suggest that they can build these for $120,000 a unit in another format. And certainly, as Joe is saying, if we were retrofitting and you had to build a building, you had to spend $1.5 million on a building you spend $1.5 million buying, you're basically at $220,000 a unit. So it's not half, but it's a lot less. So the big picture is there is a way to design and construct housing for the homeless that is a great place to live. These units are heated and air conditioned. They have security. They have a resident manager. They have all the things that people need to live and to get the social services that they may need. Question, of course, is who's going to build them and where will they be built? We'll pass that over back to Calpurnia. And thank you for listening on that.
All right. Thank you, Mark. It was really interesting to see the images. So I wanted to ask Alex, because he's actually working on the first modular constructed building to house people experiencing homelessness in our medically complex in Massachusetts. And so I was wondering, Alex, can you describe to us the project that you're leading in Worcester and how the project's been funded and the challenges you faced along the way?
Sure, be happy to. So, in Worcester, no different than many communities in the Commonwealth, we are combating the growing need to be able to house our homeless population, in particular our chronically homeless population. And so I had the privilege of being involved with a number of agencies a few years ago, including Joe Finn, in trying to come up with some solutions. And certainly this was one of the solutions that was discussed. And we were very interested and very eager to see how we could play a role. One of the advantages I think that we had right off the gate was that we had a piece of land that was, undeveloped, unused, and we thought would make a perfect setting for this type of endeavor. And very similar to what Marc described, we went with that type of setting. We were looking at a 25 unit development. It's in the District 4 of Worcester, where we have some properties that we manage already in that district. So it makes it a lot easier for us in terms of our visibility. And with the building, we will be looking at 24 units to house folks, with one of the units being for a resident manager, and then tying those wraparound services that we mentioned earlier, that I know Jim Cuddy will talk about later, and the need and the importance for that when you're building this type of setting. And for us, the challenge then became, how do we make this happen? How quickly and where? Who can fund us? And so we put an application, a one-stop application in with the state, with DHCD, for funding. MHSA was generous enough to provide us some funding as well. And the city of Worcester, it's always important that your local municipality support the project and have some skin in the game. And so the city of Worcester also contributed to the funding, and we were awarded the funding from the state, and we got right to work. Certainly, there is a tremendous amount of steps along the way. There's a lot of obstacles and a lot of barriers that we have certainly, navigated through. For example, just in our concept design, when we sat down with the city of Worcester, there were a number of things that they were concerned about. One that comes to mind is parking, for example, making sure that there's sufficient parking for the folks that either live there or the folks that were coming in to provide services or visitors. And so we found ourselves, changing the design a few times. Also working with our state funders, with DHCD. Certainly when you're receiving money, they're going to make sure that everything is buttoned up. And so there were a number of changes that they recommended as well, that we incorporated, from the size of the units. I think from our initial concept design to where we are now, we've increased the size of the entire building by 2,000 square feet. We've added additional office space so the caseworkers can have one-on-one meetings with the clients, the applicants, the residents, I should say, when they live there. We've added a multi-purpose room. We increased our laundry facility. So those are a number of things that through those discussions and working with our state funders, things that came up that we wanted to make sure we addressed. We wanted to provide adequate outdoor space. So we added a gazebo, we added bike racks, we added things that we wanted the residents in the building to be able to take advantage of when there's nice weather and be able to enjoy the property. So and the stormwater structure, then you get into some real technical stuff, right? So then you build the parking lot, you want to add some rainwater structures to capture that. So those are the things that get added to the project. That certainly increased the cost, but also for us, it certainly delayed us in terms of trying to get this off the ground as quickly as possible. And so what makes this unique for this project, what makes it unique to your typical development, is that you are, and for folks who are used to public, working with the public government, is you have a section, the 30B aspect of the project, which means that you're going to hire someone to actually build the boxes that Marc was talking about. But then you're also going to do Chapter 149, which is you're going to hire a general contractor that's going to come in and actually put the boxes together on site for you. So when you're dealing with those two things, that's where it can get touch and go, and your timing and the regs and the bidding process, procurement gets a little bit complex. And what didn't help for us is that we got hit with a pandemic along the way. And so that really threw things in a whirlwind for us, but it didn't slow us down in terms of making sure that we were going to see this project to the end. One of the biggest challenges that we're dealing with now, though, Calpurnia, and for the folks listening in, certainly has been the cost. I think throughout every one of the things that everyone talks about is they're seeing, the lack of lumber and the lack of materials and prices increasing. We have seen that ourselves, in terms of our bidding process for the boxes, in terms of talking to our vendors and potential vendors of what things may cost. We are seeing those costs increase. But to Marc's point, we still firmly believe that this project is much more affordable in this format than if you were to do it in another format that we've done, that has been seen done throughout the state in different forms, in different ways. But nevertheless, and that certainly is not helping us. But those are a few of the challenges. We also met with the neighborhood. That's a challenge that I want to make sure that folks recognize because it's reality. Anytime you're going to put a housing structure in a residential neighborhood and you tell folks it's going to be for chronically homeless, there are going to be some individuals that don't want that building in their neighborhood. And so having an open dialogue with the neighborhood and being very direct and honest with them and having them understand what our mission is and what we're trying to accomplish. And we were able to do that. And there were some requests that came along from those residents in the neighborhood that we were able to incorporate into our design as well, to give them, some alleviate some of their concerns that they had. Working with our district counselor, our local politicians is also a key piece in this to make sure that we're still in line to what the city's looking for. So those are all kind of things in the air that you're constantly juggling. But as easy as it might have been to walk away from a project like this because you're dealing with a pandemic and some of the challenges, we're still extremely excited and very motivated to complete the project. I'm happy to share some, but I wanted to kind of turn it back to you, Calpurnia, but I do have some slides I'd be happy to share with folks as well.
We'd love to see the slides.
Great. Okay. So let me pull them up. Very similar to what Marc showed earlier, but this will kind of give you, there we go. Hold on. My screen is acting up. There we go. Did that show up?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is a view of what the building will look like upon its completion in terms of, and obviously it's changed a little bit, but right now we have a vacant piece of land there. And so one of the things, the goals that we were shooting for, and again, I don't want to sound repetitive to what Marc says, but I want to use that as a way to reinforce what he said, is that we didn't want to create a structure that looked like it didn't fit in the neighborhood. We wanted to build something that you just drove by and it was part of the neighborhood. And so a lot of the homes on the street where we're building are 3-deckers, multi-floor homes, very similar to this. And we wanted to create something that would just enhance, but also match the neighborhood that folks were living in, and I think we've captured that. In terms of the site, let me zoom in a little bit. This kind of gives you an idea of the plot of land you're looking at. We're looking at about 30,000 square feet that we're working with, and so as you can see, we've created some parking. Initially, I think one of our obstacles was that the city initially wanted the parking to be set up where no one would back up, that they would leave the property facing forward. And that just became very challenging for us to accomplish and still be able to provide folks adequate spaces. So the city was able to work with us and we did come to a solution on this. So we're able to provide some adequate parking that's not on the street. It's a small dirt street and it's a tight space. So street parking is really difficult to provide here. We also have a handicap accessible parking on this side. On the right-hand side of the building, we have a gazebo. We'll have some bike racks, the receptacles for trash, and then there's some greenery on the opposite side of the building. We have some nice trees there. We want to preserve as much green space as possible. And then, of course, you have the footprint of the building. One of the things I know the state asked us to add was in the rear, kind of a deck area. So that was a new addition that we put into the design per their request. And so, but this kind of gives you a footprint of what the building will look like compared to others in the neighborhood. In terms of what the units will look like, again, very similar to what you saw Mark show you. There's a multi-purpose room. Our goal there is that we can do meetings with the residents in the building. They can have small events. Certainly during COVID, that was a concern, but obviously moving forward, we want it to be an opportunity for folks to come together and be able to, whether it's a social or educational component. I know that's a big piece for us to be able to provide workshops and resources and access to programs. And we think that will be a nice fit in the building. You have your laundry facilities, you have your manager's suite, which is a little bigger than the rest of the group. And then you have your accessible units on the first floor, a private meeting room in the back, so a caseworker can meet privately with someone in an office setting. And then you have, again, the other accessible units on the first floor there. Then when you go to the second floor, it's a very similar setup. You have your studio units. There's another private meeting room on the second floor. And again, it's just we just didn't have enough space on the first floor, so we created one right on the second floor. But again, it's with the intent of making it easy and accessible for the residents in that particular building to meet with their worker, as well as for the manager, the building manager, or anyone that needs some private space. And then we, obviously the third floor, we added another laundry facility on the third floor. Certainly will make it easy for folks, instead of having to come to the first floor to do all their laundry. There's 2 areas on the first and third floor to be able to do laundry and make it easier for them as well. So that's in a nutshell kind of what the building will look like. We are very eager. The costs have increased a little bit for us. We'll get a better idea. Right now, we've completed the bid process for the boxes. And so I'm just gonna stop sharing here, and then I can kind of tell you the update on where we are with the timeline. So with our timeline at this point, we are hoping, fingers crossed, and I say that only because sometimes, things don't always land exactly where you want. Our hope is that by August 4th, we'll get the bids in for the Chapter 149, which is the construction aspect of it. And we're hoping that by the end of September, we'll be able to close and be able to issue out the green light for the box manufacturer to start producing those boxes. During the winter, it's a perfect time for those boxes to get produced. It doesn't slow them down because that's happening all inside, as Mark showed. And then once we get past the winter and we start seeing some nice weather, we'll be able to get the contractor out there and be able to start preparing the site, get the boxes in there. And we're hoping that by the end of spring, we'll be cutting some ribbons there and hopefully be up and running. Now that's assuming everything goes well. I will say we do hit hiccups every once in a while, but we're moving forward and looking forward to that day.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I mean, it's a beautiful building. Obviously, a lot of thought has gone to the design of it to help make sure that the residents, the tenants are feeling acclimated and have space to relax, as well as meet their supportive service needs. So on that note, Jim, you have a new building going up in Worcester as well that will be constructed using modular construction at 30 Winfield Street. Could you let us know a little bit more about that project and how the supportive services will be provided for individuals who will be residing in that building?
Sure, thanks. So we're involved in a project on Winfield Street in Worcester. And that project originated in the same way that Alex talked about his project originated. And we've been able to share ideas and collaborate since the very beginning of the meetings that started in Worcester about how to get to scale on reducing homelessness. Before I talk about Winfield Street, I want to talk about two quick sentences on design and retrofitting strategies. Over the years, SMOC has probably retrofitted in excess of 75 buildings for this specific population. This is a completely different strategy, and it's one, frankly, that we welcome. Everything that Marc said in his initial remarks is accurate in terms of cost, ease, and dealing with contractors and dealing with GCs. It's a very efficient strategy. At Winfield Street, because we're a private nonprofit charitable corporation, a little bit different than the Housing Authority, our project has some similarities, but some differences from what Alex is charged with and how he's moving forward as his project. We're ready to go with permitting. We're trying to wrap up a couple of housekeeping issues on financing. We're going out to bid right now. We will bid on general contractor, which will include the manufactured piece of the general contracting contract. So we're hoping, as I sit here at the beginning of June, we're hoping to be into construction no later than September 1st. And the ability to share with Alex what he's doing, the ability to work with Marc, the ability to work with MHSA is paramount. So for folks who know our organization, you know, we spent a lot of time figuring out how to do management and how to provide support services to sustain tenancies. This has given us the opportunity to look at and further our own best practices and protocols about how you choreograph the property management, the asset management, and the delivery of social services to folks who will be living here, coming in from emergency housing and also coming in from folks who are sleeping rough. That's the population. As it got articulated before, there's a medically frail population. So as you're looking at doing this, as you're looking at considering this, I would ask you to think about this in this way. We're talking about a population that's frail, a population that dies young, whether it's of the disease or whether it's because of lifestyle or choices. We're talking about short lifespans. We're also talking about the things that we all talk about now, those of us who are in this field. We're talking about barriers. We're talking about racial disparities. We're talking about equity issues. This design with a choreographed social service, property management, integration allows people and allows providers like us to really look at this from a public health perspective, you know, which is essential. If there's one thing that I've learned over the years of doing this, it really is this. How do we integrate a public health perspective that gets at racial disparities of health, that gets at social determinants of health? Because at the end, what I think we're doing, we can talk about bricks and mortar, we can talk about development strategies. You know, this is something that we've welcomed, and we have this project going right now with Marc. We're ready to talk with him about 4 other sites that we spent time identifying. But in terms of what the goal there is obviously to build to scale. But there's also one other goal that I don't hear talked about much. We're also talking about creating environments where people can live longer, where life expectancy doesn't end around 55. And that, to me, is really one of the critical pieces of this initiative. Thanks, Calpurnia.
Thank you very much for that. So Jim Cuddy, could you talk a little bit more about the supportive services in terms of what exactly would be available to the residents or tenants in that building?
Yes. So let's take it from the choreographed or integrated approach to how you help people sustain tenancies. And while Alex with the public health and us with the nonprofit, there are slight differences because of our mandates. We share common philosophies about how to help tenants maintain their residency. How do you do that when folks have experienced a lot of failures in their life? So let's go to the design aspect first. For a long time, when we retrofitted, we made sure how we were going to do the house manager model. And both you saw the layout from the architectural standpoint, from Marc's standpoint, about how he builds, where you place the resident manager's apartment. You saw it in both the diagrams, you saw it in Alex's diagram. Where is the resident manager? Where are the counseling rooms? Where are the meeting rooms? So that becomes a key issue, because what you're really trying to do is build an environment, a house environment. Call it a peer-driven model. But that's the first piece of this. The second piece, which is something that SMOC learned over a long period of time, was how do you integrate and how do you attach to a peer management model, both the property manager, the offsite property manager, how is that person a part of a team? And secondly, how you address and how you construct the social service part of the team. And when we started doing this work years ago, we didn't have many access to resources for supportive services. What MHSA did in 2003 to 2006 was to be able to convince the Medicaid system that case management services were essential to sustaining tenancy. So, there are different strategies that MHSA has created, articulated, and pushed into the community over the years. Certainly one of them is CSPEC, where there's billing codes, where we can bill for services. It was a model, it was a pilot project, in MHSA's efforts, it created a billing code. So you have that piece in place, which means that you're tying into a behavioral health provider who can also deliver more specialized social behavioral health services. Think of psych socials, think of psych socials, think of MediVals, think of med appointments. So you've got that piece in place. Then you've also got the case manager. Call that case manager a broker of services, call that case manager a navigator, and that's in place too. So the goal of the provider agency is either to contract out for these services or be able to do them in-house. But at the end of the day, for the 18, 20, or 24 people who are living on that site with a resident manager, you're really creating a community. You're really creating, on some levels, a peer model community where you have specialized services in the form of a team with the property manager, the on-site, the house manager, the property manager, and the social service coordinator. That's really what you're creating. And the one thing that we've learned over the years in doing that, Calpurnia, is that really now, because of the nature of the population, we're talking about a graying population. We're talking about people who are more compromised. We're talking about people who have suffered from racial disparities around health, regardless of what their housing status has been. You're really trying to create the environment that eliminates all those barriers, creates more access, and really brings to forefront the health piece of this, the public health, the preventative health piece of that. Maybe we've all learned this lesson, SMOC certainly has, from the pandemic, but we're talking about soft tissue infections, we're talking about COPD, we're talking about diabetes, we're talking about heart related things. All of those, when you look at those statistical databases, you see racial disparities in health, you see access disparities in health. So this is what the team can address within the context of, if anything came out tomorrow, from what Marc and Alex were saying, the bottom line is this is a very, very respectful environment. So you're really you're sending a message to the community, as Alex talked about, and you're sending a message to the folks who live there in the design that Marc has promulgated and has worked so hard with Joe to begin. You're saying something. We're going to create a respectful place for you to live, and we're going to try to have that respectful place address your community needs. And I think that's what's exciting. It's really building the team, either individually if you've got the organizational capacity, or with partners, because there are partners through the organization. Alex's organization and I, we one of the good things that's come out is we thought about how to partner with each other. So this is very exciting. It's respect.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I feel like
I was just gonna add, I'm sorry, California, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's like a theme, I think, with A Place to Live is building respectful homes for individuals experiencing medically complex diseases as well as experiencing homelessness.
I just wanted to add, I think it's important to keep in mind, it's no accident that these two programs are actually happening in Worcester. And I think that a key part of that has been the fact that the city of Worcester and the city manager, Ed Augustus, and the health foundation of Worcester County. I mean, there's an intentional plan in Worcester around trying to essentially end homelessness, to end the rough sleepers, to provide that level of housing. They haven't adopted, some of the more regressive measures some communities have, but instead are really taking an intentional planned approach to creating the housing and the services necessary, which I think you guys can both confirm that, correct? The city has been incredibly supportive in terms of pushing this type of model forward. Marc, I saw you.
Yeah, I just want to be, I think we're all eager to support this idea and pat ourselves on the back a little bit. I would like to, however, add a little bit of reality to the situation that we all face, which is, I remember the first time Jim and I were talking about this, and Jim said, "That's it. We're going to do 20 of these buildings." And I said, great, because Jim is a big thinker, right? Let's do one first, right? I'm sure you remember that. And so I think it's important, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited that, for Alex in particular, because Alex represents in my mind a whole segment of providers who are in a different situation than Jim is, and has, Alex, you have huge challenges and constraints in terms of how you can actually deliver this from a procurement point of view, and you talked about that. So when you have led the way on this, and when you have shown that it can be done, that will be a huge step forward. And when we can take people to see these respectful places for people to live, others will say, I think, this is a good thing. That having been said, we still face the issue of what sites. Now, fortunately, SMOC has a site, and fortunately, Alex and Worcester Housing Authority had a site. But the challenge here, I think you would both agree, or we would all agree, is finding a place where we can successfully put these, whether it's for 18 units or for 24 units, where we can successfully navigate through the concern that communities have about having formerly homeless people living next to them. And if you cannot get the site, you can have the best design and the best social services in the world, but you got no project.
Well,
Right.
and if I was going to say, if I may, Marc, you've hit the nail on the head. I think one of the things that I have enjoyed about this process is that, and I think, Joe, you said it to me one time, we're kind of a guinea pig along the way here, learning along the way. But one of the things that I've tried to do along this entire process is talk to as many communities or folks that are interested in hearing what our successes have been and where have we made mistakes, because we made our share of them. And one of the things that I think is very, very critical is that the community does support a project, because if you're standing alone, it certainly makes it very, very difficult. We've benefited from the fact that we have received support from the city manager, the mayor, the city council, but also there's just a tremendous amount of agencies in Worcester that are very supportive to this. And they're just a great advocate for us many times in helping us get through this, through some of the challenges. Certainly the neighborhood, our first meeting with the neighborhood did not go well. That meeting ended and I felt a little defeated, I have to admit, but at the same time, it motivated me because I knew the project was going to happen. And I think when you take on a project like this, you just have to say, we're going to get it done, no matter what. And the real trick to it was, now, how do we get the residents to get behind it as well? And we did. I mean, I remember personally knocking on doors in the neighborhood, talking to folks, answering their questions, and sometimes having to tell them something they didn't want to hear. They wanted me to just say, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to walk away. And I said, no, we're going to do it. But, what are your concerns? And some concerns were very legitimate. And some concerns, in my opinion, were not legitimate. They were more fear. They were fear of what their preconceived notion of what a formerly homeless person is. And so we were able to kind of work through that. And I think that has helped us along the way. We also brought in partners from the neighborhood, people that have been there a long time that were supportive of the project. I think that also brought some credibility to the neighborhood that we had that support. But that is a huge piece of it. And my advice to folks is stick with it. Find someone in your agency that's got commitment and passion, and then you connect with an agency like MHSA or SMOC or a local agency that really gets behind this. And I think ultimately you'll get through those barriers. And hopefully, in spring of next year, we'll invite you all down to Worcester and do some ribbon cutting.
So in terms of like the different restrictions and availability of land, Mark, are there zoning restrictions that come with modular construction that we should be aware of?
It doesn't have to do with the modular construction. It has to do with, first of all, multifamily housing is only permitted in certain districts normally. And there is a ratio of parking to units that usually requires a large lot for a 24 unit spot, which ends up being extremely expensive and frankly, very wasteful, because you saw on Alex's plan, I didn't show you a site plan for Winfield Street, but both of them have the appropriate, but relatively small number of parking spots because the residents don't have cars. The cars are fundamentally for the case workers or for visitors, but if you've got 24 units and you're in an area where you theoretically have to have 1.5 cars per unit, the idea of having a 36 unit parking lot, the 36 car parking lot just blows the cost of it out of the wall. So the zoning is one of the complexities that has to be worked out, both from an approval point of view, but also from a financial point of view.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Oh, and SMOC. So for anyone who's considering doing this, that's a nonprofit, wants to move your nonprofit in a way, your development team needs to include a land use attorney with a thorough knowledge of the Dover Amendment for any project outside of Boston. There are many attorneys who know this. And the Dover Amendment is something to get your hands around and needs to be considered in any development strategy that's used as part of creating housing for this population. Doesn't have to be adversarial, doesn't have to be contentious. may or may not require community meetings, but in any partnership that you all enter into, the Dover Amendment and the potential use of the Dover Amendment needs to be a key part in your thinking and in your strategy.
And Jim, I believe that the component of the Dover Amendment that's so important is the educational
Yes.
aspect. Because
Exactly.
there's several triggers that allow you to use Dover
That's right.
to override
The broad definition of educational facility, yes, which will restrict the questions about this through your land use attorney to what you just articulated, Mark: parking issues, coverage issues, and setback issues. But you're right, that's exactly right.
All right, that's a key piece. So we have a few questions from the audience. One was, what is the Dover Amendment, which we just answered. Another question is, who pays for the monthly rent for the tenants in the building?
Sure. So for the Worcester Lewis Street project, we are going to have 24 units that will have project-based vouchers, a mixture of state and federal project-based vouchers. And so through those vouchers, that will generate revenue, operational revenue for the maintenance of the, managing the building, maintaining the building. But also, similar to what you see with subsidized housing, there's a percentage of the residents' income that goes towards their rent. Generally speaking, it's, you rough it out to about 30%. Certainly, if someone's at zero income, then 30% of zero is zero. And so then the subsidy would carry the entire portion of that. But if someone is hypothetically making $600 a month, working or some other form of income, then rough figures, 30% of that would be their monthly rent.
I'd like to jump in, and just because I'm an advocate, so
Yes.
Let me take an advocacy moment. We've really been pushing with DHCD. We've been advocating for quite a while now, and anybody who wants to join us is more than welcome. But the MRVP is not really, it's a difficult voucher to run with a low threshold manner, quite honestly, because of the way it's structured. And, we're really trying to see if we cannot get like a more flexible housing first subsidy of some type of a voucher that would have less constraints on it and less hoops that the tenant has to jump through. And because you're talking about bringing rough sleepers in, that this would be much more helpful, where a housing provider would be able to bring them in and then gradually build into all of the things that people are looking for. I mean, you're dealing with people who don't have any ID or different things at times. And it takes weeks sometimes to transition a person into housing. So one of the things I think would go great with any of these types of things is really looking at somehow that rent gets paid, so to speak, in a way that's easier to bring people more directly in.
Fantastic. Okay.
That'd be great.
So one other question is, what is the price per square foot in the Worcester development? I don't know if you're able to estimate that just yet, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that, so right now it's a little tough because, we've got stuff going out for bid. And so the initial budget or total cost for us when we initially took on this project was a shade under $3 million. $2.8 million to $3 million was our entire estimate and funding. So we think that number, certainly with the changes, the additions that we put in, as I mentioned previously, you're probably looking, and now with the pandemic prices, unless they start coming down, you're probably looking at $4 million is probably the total cost. Certainly, I hate to throw that number out there and then not really know what the future holds. I've had people tell me that the cost estimates will start coming down a little bit as we get into the fall and winter and things calm down. Other folks say it could be another 9 to 12 months of this. So, but rough figure, I would say it's a $4 million total cost for us. with the caveat that it might be a little less or it might be a little higher. So I'll have a better view of it probably in a couple of months when the bids do come in and we get to actually see what folks are charging.
And at Winfield, I think we're shooting for about $240 a foot per square foot. So that's
Yes,
looking at the same numbers.
exactly.
So I'll take one more question. Are there any concerns about segregating the tenants in one building and having them feeling stigmatized?
As opposed to letting them sleep
Scattered.
outside or living in shelter? No.
Yes.
I think that's a great point that Jim makes. Yeah.
This is specialized housing, and the key issue is respectfulness and housing sustainability. And when you look at it through that lens, you know, your strategies, the strategies you're putting together with public funds running through it, it really is it's the responsibility of the developer to make sure that it's done right, it's done well, and it's a responsibility of the manager to make sure that people can live together in a respectful situation and sustain their lives. So no, I have no.
Yeah, there's so many things we say, you know, that, oh, you know, what's wrong with this housing or this particular thing, but it's okay for people to be in shelters or on the street or outside. Anyway, I don't know if you want to comment.
Well, Calpurnia, I would also say that I think it's a very different thing. If you were going to put 10 of these buildings on one site, you created an environment where you might be concerned about that. But the whole philosophy behind this is to spread them, you know, around and into neighborhoods. And my thought, and you know, both Jim and Alex, you know this better than I, but my thought from the very beginning is that if you put people into respectful housing, they're not homeless anymore. They're just people. And so they're just people living in a neighborhood, just like everybody else. And so you know, they have issues. Some of them can overcome them with the right kind of respectful environment for them to live in. Some not, of course.
You're scaling the projects. You know, we're scaling these projects. And as you say, it's much similar. It's what New York City tried to do. I don't remember how long ago, but their whole approach to housing challenging populations was all based on how you work together with neighborhoods and how you don't saturate and stuff like that. And, you know, it had a mixed degree of success, but on a statewide basis, that's always been my thought about MHSA, is that it's trying to encourage development in scattered sites that are scaled based on Marc's pioneering work. And, you know, that's the way it works. And the end result is exactly as Marc just articulated.
Excellent
And
point.
the designs, frankly, as Alex said in his design, and what both Marc and Alex showed you all, you know, these buildings are designed to flow within the environment that they're being built in and become part of community. And then it's really up to the organizations that doing it to make sure that happens. You need to move from construction to operational reality, which is, you know, from a construction basis, we've made these buildings. We're not retrofitting, you know, sore thumbs. We're creating new housing that is designed to flow into the neighborhood. And, you know, once they're open, you're requesting that your property manager and your house manager and your social service and support staff are working on that same level, flowing into the neighborhood, which I think benefits everyone.
Right. So on that note, we will be closing out. I just want to thank you, Marc, Jim, and everyone, and Joe, for your time and expertise. This has been really informative. I also want to thank our many partners, including the Massachusetts Community Health and Healthy Aging Funds, focuses on policy systems and environmental changes, Health Resources in Action, the Housing Authority, local politicians, community resident service providers, and DHCD for these projects that we just named. behalf of MHSA, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.